Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mighty Oak Show. Glad to have you with us today. If you are watching on YouTube, thank you for doing that. Every time we start an episode, I say the exact same thing. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed. So many people, they find us one way or another and don't subscribe. When you don't subscribe, you miss the other content. We put tons of content on our channel, and we're constantly producing that to help you, to help those that you know, to give you a resource that you can send out. I was asked the other day, what can I do for someone that I know needs help, they know they need help, but they don't want help? What can I do? There are a lot of things that you can do. One of the things you can do is scroll down through our channel. You can find content that would be specific to the questions they're asking or the situation they may be in. Send that out to them. Give them an opportunity to watch that, and maybe that will be the thing that will help them take the next step. Whatever the case, make sure you're subscribed. Hit the notification bell then. That lets you know when the content comes online. Leave us a comment. We would love to connect with you there. And again, share this out if it's helpful to those that you know. Thank you for doing that. If you're listening over at Mojo 50 or you're listening to the podcast, thank you for doing that. We love the folks there. Take some time later to go to the YouTube channel and subscribe, and that would be fantastic. Today, I am here with two very familiar guests to the Mighty Oaks Show. I'm here with Branden Kunath, who, of course, is the National Programs Director for the Mighty Oaks Foundation, and Luis Rivera, whose title changes all of the time. So he is our operations manager for our programs, and we do a lot of different things here at Mighty Oaks Foundation, but Luis oversees the operations. There's just so much in that. I told someone the other day that basically what we do is run logistics. We do a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, moving a lot of people around. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more today, what exactly we do. But we wanted to talk about something today, and this is why the three of us are here together. Talk about something that we have talked around and even spoken to directly a few times over the years, and that is the issue of post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder. And we can talk and will about how we define that. But this is a concept, this is an idea, a phrase that a lot of people are familiar with, particularly here in the United States. When we talk about veterans and veterans issues and veterans causes, post-traumatic stress is not too far behind. That's going to be part of the conversation. Our audience, of course, would probably be more familiar with this than others. But unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what that is, about what it is not, about who struggles with that and who can struggle with it, and then even the way to move forward. And I wanted to spend some time today just talking about that. For those that aren't familiar, the Mighty Oaks Foundation, we work specifically with a couple of different groups of folks. Veterans, those who have served in the military, active duty service members, those who are currently serving in the military, first responders, those in the first responder community, that could be police officers or firefighters, some others, and then the spouses of those. So just about every group of folks who we would identify as being prone to or high risk for post-traumatic stress, those are the folks that we work with. And we've had tremendous success trying to help people process through some of these things. And we talked about that a lot. You can go listen to another show about specifically what we do. But because of that work, a lot of folks come to us and ask, what is combat trauma, or what is post-traumatic stress? What is post-traumatic stress disorder? Others will look at our literature on this subject and say, we notice that you say post-traumatic stress, but you don't often say post-traumatic stress disorder. Why is that? So let's begin at the top, and I think this can be helpful for folks. And the premise is this: whether you've served in the military or not served in the military, whether you've been to combat or not been to combat, trauma is something that is common to all of us as humans. You could be a child, you could be very old, elderly. It doesn't matter. We've all dealt with trauma. And so this conversation can be helpful to all of us. Let's start with the big one. What is post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder? Luis, I'll let you begin, and then Branden, you can jump into, when Luis messes up the definition, you go ahead and jump in and fix that for him.
So what we've been putting out basically is that post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder is a normal reaction to an abnormal event.
A normal reaction to an abnormal event. Making the event abnormal.
That's right. The event is abnormal, and the way I'm behaving after that, post that, is normal, right, based on that event.
Yeah. Why do we, when we're talking about this, often separate the word disorder from the common vernacular? The clinical term is post-traumatic stress disorder. And that ties back to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. I think we're on version 5.
I think so.
That identifies post-traumatic stress disorder as an emotional disorder, talks about the physiological impacts we know there are and all the things that go along with that, but it calls it a disorder. We don't do that, and there's a very specific reason. Why don't we call it a disorder?
We don't call it a disorder because we believe we're functioning normally based on this creation aspect. That's just how we were made to function based on what's happened.
Right.
So we're functioning normally, therefore we're not disordered.
We're not disordered, right? And that has implications to understand, which we can come back to. Branden, when you're talking to people about this and, having retired from the military, you spent time going through the VA system and even some of the VA's trauma programs and post-traumatic stress programs and those kind of things. Maybe talk for a minute about the more clinical aspect of this. If a clinician was sitting here, what they would say, and then connecting to what Luis said, why we define that a little bit differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think if a healthcare professional with a background in neuroscience or something like that was sitting here right now, they would give that almost by the book verbatim clinical definition of it, and they kind of stick to that based on what they believe and they understand. And then that's where, like Luis was saying, what separates us is our starting point or our viewpoint of the creation aspect of it, and understanding, at least from my perspective and my opinion, removing that one little word, disorder, helps to almost destigmatize that whole statement, post-traumatic stress disorder, and understanding that, having that reaction is normal, and your body's reacting in a certain way, and not trying to get into the weeds, but the way you respond later in a protective manner, your body's doing what it was created to do.
Right.
And so understanding that through that, it's our normal reaction. So how can it be disordered? Where that never was explained, whether I was dealing with strictly naval medicine, or transferring over into the Veterans Affairs kind of realm. You kind of go through the gambit of the different forms of therapy, whether it's cognitive, EMDR, whatever version they're on now. As well as all the other slew of things that they'll kind of throw at you, the medications and stuff like that. They kind of stick to the same track, if you will, from my own experience of okay, check this box, and they do what they can in the sense, but I think at their starting point, they're not really on the track from the get-go, where we try to start on the right track of understanding, okay, here's our foundation, what we understand, where this is how we were created. Everybody's going to experience something. I mean, you go biblically to today, people experience something traumatic, and it's how we responded after that, or through that. That really will kind of make the difference between everything. In understanding that post-traumatic stress disorder is, it is an anxiety, emotional issue, where your neuro and sensory pathways and all those things are either reordered or overworking themselves to the point where your body's not reacting the way that you think it should, but it's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Right. And I think it's important for people to understand that when we talk, we being, those of us at this table, those of us in our organization, when we talk about post-traumatic stress and trauma specifically, we are talking about those things and defining those things very much with the goal of helping folks move through them.
Exactly.
We don't define simply to place a label on people. A clinical definition would tie particularly post-traumatic stress diagnosis to the fear of death or perceived death, exposure to death, sexual trauma, a couple of other categories. It's very, very specific and it's very narrow. For veterans, a lot of us who have been in combat, we can say, well, I've been exposed to all of those things, and that's where my problems are coming from. Whereas, definitions are only helpful if they become a bridge to healing. If you simply use a definition to label someone or to diagnose someone as a clinical, in a clinical setting, and there's not help on the other side of that, then it's not helpful. It puts some people on an island where they say, well, I haven't been diagnosed. I don't fit that definition, so I guess I'm not that bad. I need to deal with this on my own. Or it puts people on the other island where you don't know what I've been through. You don't understand. I've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. And our perspective would be that clinical care and help is sometimes helpful and very important. Medication, although it's so often misused, it can be a helpful tool to get someone to the place where they can experience healing. It's not the solution, and it should end at some point, but it can be a tool. Clinicians, therapies, those things, they can be helpful, but ultimately there has to be a bigger understanding of trauma and then the path forward in spite of trauma.
Yeah, if I could add, for me, it almost seemed like getting diagnosed or going through that process was the end state. Like there was, and it might have been just for that time, that my own perspective, that it seemed like I was just there to get the stamp, if you will, that I have this issue or that issue. And then anything after that, it was kind of up to me to wrestle or figure out on my own, or you kind of jump from, naval medicine for me. They do what they can, and then they kind of pass you off and pass the buck to the next person. And then you're, especially with the VA, once you transfer and you go through that transition, you ultimately start all over again.
Right.
So that frustrating process that one person has already been through is going to go through it all over again, and it just kind of creates this frustrating cycle where you start compartmentalizing, or you build those islands where it's really easy to lean into that frustration of like, man, what's the point? And going in there and saying, all right, look, I already went through all this. This is what they said, and then you start over again. And that person either picks up and takes off from there, or they start you off a brand new. So it definitely doesn't help the overall issue. Again, when the starting point was kind of off from the start. And I don't say that as a blanket statement. It was my experience, and just knowing from the countless people that I've interacted with and been in this realm for a while, it seems to be the common theme that goes on.
It becomes the end state. This is what I am now, and this is who I am now, and everything in my life is going to be framed this way. I also think that understanding trauma only from a clinical perspective is not helpful, in that it separates people who have dealt with trauma. Military people now, we all work with veterans. We're all veterans. It's almost like a sacred cow. Like, don't talk to me. I served in the military, therefore I have post-traumatic stress or something. When we know that something like 70% of American adults will experience a traumatic event at some point in their lives. When we talk about sexual trauma and child abuse and all these issues, trauma is not reserved for the veteran. And when we start to look at it only clinically and only connected to combat or these experiences in war, that's just not helpful toward healing. One of the best definitions I've heard of trauma, actually an Army chaplain gave this to me, was trauma is an event or series of events that pushes one beyond their ability to cope. I love that. It's an event or series of events that pushes one beyond their ability to cope. So it's not tied to anything in particular. We're all wired different, but something's happened in your life that we would say from a creation perspective has knocked you off the path that God has set in front of you. So now you're not able to do what God wants you to do, to fulfill the responsibilities or the goals that He's given to you because of this thing. So when we interact with folks, our goal is to get them back to the place where, in spite of that trauma, they are aligning to what God wants them to be. And that's why addressing the disordered part is so important. Luis, you talk to a lot of guys. Talk about the difference between someone who realizes I'm not broken and someone who just, they're going to hang on to that label because there's some kind of self-identity in that. Yeah,
and I think you said it all right there at the very end, identity. It's getting them to realize, okay, what are they identifying with? Who are they? And if I can I can begin to see this way forward for somebody who's realizing, no, I don't have to stay here because this is what I've been diagnosed with, compared to somebody who's just unwilling, right, to move forward because this is where they like to be. Yeah. And there's a little bit of teamwork that goes on for me showing them, look, this is what basically I know to be true. And it's really up to you to start to move forward.
Branden and I talked about this a couple shows ago when we were together. Talked about incentivizing brokenness and how, in a lot of ways, I think unintentionally, and even probably with good intentions, the systems built to address post-traumatic stress in veterans and service members has incentivized people to be broken and to stay broken. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah.
And when you throw money and other things at it.
And I think that's it's really a sad story, and it's really a detriment to us as a people, as a country, as a culture. And if I think to myself about guys that went through World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, how them and their families move forward. But now things are just not that. And guys have just gotten into this mode or this zone that this is my label, this is who I am. I'm comfortable here.
And the government will pay me to stay here. In fact,
That's
if
right.
I get better, I'm going to lose my benefits.
That's right. Yeah, and I'm incentivized for being this, and it also in a really weird way creates this, gives them this leeway to behave however they want to behave in their family, and in the long run, it just affects so many things in their life.
How do you convince someone that they need to get better when they're so tied to the incentives?
Yeah. That I'm glad you asked it that way. I don't know if there's any convincing that I can do. I think what necessarily has to happen is a heart change. And I know for a fact a person has to have a heart change in order for the rest of, it's not a behavior change. I'm talking about a heart change, because I can't really convince anyone of anything like that.
I would say the behavior change comes after
That's right.
the heart change.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to understand that it's the renewing of your old self and into the new self, and in recent, I've seen a lot of the culture shift in television shows and everything. It's probably not a television show that I haven't watched where they've introduce something or someone in there with post-traumatic stress disorder, and they kind of said it like boldly and everything in it, and it kind of almost makes it to where you're relevant if you have it, and you can be a part of the story, which goes back to that incentivizing of it, and that it gives you the ability to be a part of the conversation or fit in some way. Yeah. We've also talked about it like the badge of honor kind of aspect, to attach yourself to this dysfunctional veteran aspect, or environment. And it goes back to, how can you convince somebody or shift somebody's mind and to go in a different way? But for me, it's refocusing where they find their hope and their purpose in, so that they can have that heart change to eventually work on the behavior changes to, become a new person. I don't know how many times we've heard it to where somebody will come to us and say, well, I just want this person back. They make that statement. I want the old person back.
Right.
Jeanette,
typically a spouse would say, I want my husband or wife.
Jeanette, my wife, would say, you were once this way. Why can't you be that way? And we have to understand and come to terms with that may never happen again. And it's okay. Yeah. But you can grow through that, and you can become something so much better. And who really wants to when you think about it, who really wants to stay the old you? When we think in, in all kinds of different terms, you don't want to stay in that old person. You want to grow through it. You want to become stronger, better. That should be the goal. But again, it goes back to that initial diagnosis being the feeling where that's the end state, or that's the goal.
Right.
And then you're kind of left, okay, now what now?
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, but I think also it has to begin with what's true about post-traumatic stress. What's true about me? What's true about what's in my heart? Mm-hmm. Like when we get to that, I think that's where the beginning of healing and the beginning of a behavior change will come.
So this is the part where people are listening and they start getting upset, right? Because they've been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress, they're receiving some kind of a benefit from that. And they may say, you don't know, or you're down on this or negative. A couple things. One, I know a lot of people who, receive aid from the government because of their service. I think if the government sends you off to war and something happens to you, the responsibility is for them to take care of that. Medical and all those things. We would all agree on that. This is not to say that the help provided by the government is help you should stay away from out of some kind of bravado or something like that, or just believe enough or something. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about staying away even from clinical help necessarily, or those things. One of the things that helped me with this years ago was, as I looked at our program and how we the interplay between us and government programs, because most of the men and women who attend one of our sessions, one of our programs, has access to all the VA programs. So they've been through those programs. So the way I view the interplay between the two is a clinician would start with clinical diagnosis, they'd start with medication and therapies, and if faith somewhere along the path becomes a helpful therapy, they would include it. We flip it upside down and we start with faith and have those discussions. And if therapy or medication becomes a helpful tool later on, we would also include those. Because as behaviors change, as habits change, as things are needed, there are a lot of therapies and other techniques that can be helpful. But it has to begin with faith. It has to begin with a conversation about post-traumatic stress, what it is, what it isn't, about the man, as you mentioned, who we are, and then how to move forward from there. So when we're talking about this, let's talk about first what it is. Okay, so a normal response to an abnormal situation. We sometimes talk about the limbic system, and these are things we use as we're explaining this. There's a part of our brain that stores information. It's historical data, typically tied to something that would be a motive, a trauma, even good feelings. It's stored there whether we know it or not. And when we, somewhere down the road, encounter circumstances similar to the circumstances that existed when that event took place, that kicks in. Our bodies respond the way now they responded when that event happened before. Okay, so that's how we're created. Talk about how that's a good thing. Now it can be misused, but that's a good thing. And when we talk about the body's natural response to an abnormal situation, how does all of this play out?
Yeah, I would say that I'll just mention, let's say, an experience that I had. I think I've definitely mentioned before that the very last mission I've ever had, a helicopter crashed, and at that time I didn't think it was that big of an issue. But as time went on, these thoughts started to come, and dreams, and I couldn't sleep, and all these things. So I saw, because of that, other problems started to develop. Fast forward, after I've gotten so much help through the clinical route, eventually another traumatic event happened in my life, which I believe was the catalyst that led me to Mighty Oaks. During that time frame, I remember going into a grocery store, but it was a grocery store that was from like the Middle East. And my wife and I, we went in there, and before we walked in, I remember her turning to me and asking me, "Hey, are you going to be okay going in here?" I'm like thinking to myself, of course I'm going to be okay. Yeah. And as I was going down this aisle, these smells started to come up. Even the cans that I started to see with this writing was just, I started to look at it, and out of nowhere, heart rate started to go up. these thoughts started to come back in my mind, and I just couldn't catch my breath.
Yeah.
And I remember just turning to her, I said, I think I better go step outside. But it was this subtle thing that happened, but like you said, somewhere in my past, this timestamp happened in my brain that it recalled when all the sight, the smell, the sound started to come up.
And it's not, your brain's not broken for doing that.
That's right.
That is your body's shortcut, your brain's shortcut to say, we've been here before, and last time we were here, something bad happened, so you better watch out.
Right.
And so we view that as bad because in a store in San Diego, or we always use the example of your kids aren't moving fast enough, and you lose your mind because your brain kicks in and can't separate those out. It can be a bad thing, but we've got to understand we're not broken because that's happening. It's happening because God created us something in us that keeps us safe.
Yeah. If I could add, that's where going back to understanding what post-traumatic stress really is and what it means and what kind of falls underneath that, and that it goes back to the anxiety disorder where things get reordered. Those pathways, whether it's your neuro or your sensory, they get reordered. So you have those things that will shortcut, and it's also been described as kind of like an old equalizer from your stereo that you hit a certain preset and things adjust.
Right.
Where it could be something very, very specific or very subtle. Even remembering when the immersion trainer first came to Camp Pendleton, where they outfitted this old tomato processing plant by San Clemente into a no-kidding city in Iraq somewhere, and they pumped in the smells, they pumped in the sights, sounds, everything you could think to. Putting a RPG rocket on a string that fires with simunition rounds and stuff. But you walked in there, and either you immediately recognized it, or for some of the newer guys who hadn't been deployed yet, they're starting to get this understanding. Oh, okay, what's that smell? And I don't know how many times my Marines came up and asked, like, how like realistic is this? And I'd be able to tell them, like, well, definitely it's crazy. I don't know what they are pumping in here, but it smells just like it.
Right.
And so you start to build that as a way to prepare yourself and get your mind, in that area to where when it does happen, it's almost muscle memory. You react,
it's subconscious
and
thought.
The old saying, you train like you fight, fight like you kind of train. You fight like you train. There's a reason for it. Well, the same thing could be, the kid touching a hot stove when he was young. Every time he walks by, after that, he's going to know, oh, if I touch that, I don't. Funny story, my son, Cameron, we were in Texas at a restaurant. It was Lupita Tortilla Factory or something like that.
Sure.
A really great
Pizza Tortilla Factory.
I didn't say pizza. I said Lupita.
Oh, I thought you said pizza.
That'd be it's like Taco Bell. Anyways, so they brought the fajitas to the table, and it was in a big cast iron skillet. And Cameron seen that it was sizzling and doing everything, and for whatever reason, he reached out and touched the cast iron skillet, and immediately screamed and pulled his finger back and was like, I need water, and he stuck his finger in the cold water. Well, we have a cast iron skillet on our stove at the house, and we joke about it now on, but he knows now you don't touch something that's sizzling, but that's what is going on. And that's a very simple example of how your body is protecting yourself, the same way you see a sound or see a sound, you hear a sound, see something, and then you find yourself going back to those issues or situations or whatever it was. But again, it's normal. You're not broken. You're not crazy.
Right.
But if you choose to, that's the problem, is if you choose to stay there and just accept that and not try to work through that, that's where I would argue a kind of the disorder would come into play.
Because you're stuck.
You're choosing to stay there.
There's this unwillingness to move forward.
Exactly. And it goes back to, making the choice, either accepting it, this is where I'm at, and choosing to stay there, or saying, okay, this ain't right. how can I move past this?
Yeah.
How can I grow through it?
Right.
And it's, the General Mattis quote, where he talks about damaged and broken veterans in the military community. And he says, I don't buy it.
Yeah.
He's like, there's a huge difference where post-traumatic growth actually should come into play. The same way you go through tough training for a reason.
Yeah.
You do all those little things during training for a reason.
Right.
The same way our body goes through things to help us grow, to help us react and protect ourselves and be stronger and help others learn. The same way that we're sitting here right now,
right,
taking what we've known, what we've been through, all of that, and sharing it.
Yeah, it's the same system can be trained for good, or it can respond in a way that, so it can be trained, as you were talking about. It can be something that becomes a response that we don't recognize. But, and it's important to say, there are some downsides, I guess, to having been in a traumatic event, and now your brain, doing what it was designed to do, responds in ways that aren't always healthy because of the moment in time. So it's the right thing, it's just at the wrong time or in the wrong place. Again, we use the example often, if you read some of our literature, about, you're in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever you are, and the alarm goes off telling you that there's an incoming mortar attack. Your buddy who has been through this 30 times this month doesn't move very fast. You start screaming at him. He doesn't care. He's getting his boots on. Mortar round comes to the ceiling and kills him. Now, 5 years later, you're at home with your 3-year-old trying to get her out the door for soccer. She's not putting her shoes on fast enough. Well, your brain kicks in and says, last time we were in a situation like this, someone died. And you start screaming, you start doing silly stuff. We talk about, veterans acting like 3-year-olds throwing a temper tantrum and that stuff. And then it's easy to say, well, that's because of my trauma. That's because of what I went through. So it's identifying there are some things that happen when we find ourselves in a situation that pushes us beyond. Makes us angry, makes us this, makes us that, makes us emotional. I mean, there are a lot of things that can happen. So we need to learn how to identify those things, but refuse to justify our bad behavior. There is no justification for behaving badly. So when something like that happens, you're screaming at your daughter. When you get control of yourself, mostly for me, when my wife starts screaming at me and I get control of myself, then it's apologizing, going back. But it's identifying the situation and staying out of that situation so that you can control yourself. There's no excuse to behave badly.
Absolutely.
I think we mentioned, in the class about this OODA loop.
Yeah, right.
If I can observe the situation, orient myself properly, I can decide and then act.
Yes.
If I make that a habit long enough, eventually these things in the past won't have control.
It's being intentional.
Yeah.
Because so often we just kind of go through the motions and then we explode, and then because we don't want to be responsible or intentional, we blame something.
Yeah, it's our get out of the jail kind of free card, if you will, or that excuse to justify, because I went and did this and I experienced this, then I have the entitlement or right to be the jerk, or everybody needs to change their habits and their ways to adjust and accommodate me. And that was definitely my case. It still kind of crushes me to this day, but actually hearing my wife say to my children, hey, be quiet, calm down, because you don't want to upset dad. And hearing that, and my kids, all they were doing, they were just playing. They weren't being too loud or anything at that time. And that's a thought, memory that's ingrained in me. But it was definitely one of those things that as I started going through the process and realizing, like, okay, there are things you can control, there's things you definitely can't control, but how do you respond to both of those? But we know we're supposed to be out of the door on Sunday at 10 a.m., 10:10 every time we're in the car, and 9:59 to about 10:09, I'm like freaking out, but I have to kind of take the breath and calm down and realize, like, we make it there every time. Like we're fine. Nothing.
Okay.
It's not going to be the end of the world. But because I've have those time hacks embedded in me and just ingrained to, you have to hit this at this line. You have to hit this line, and just the importance of it. I have to also remember, okay, I'm not in that situation right now. It's not a life or death situation. In the same way where if I'm driving down the street and I hear a jake brake on a truck and I could be right next to it, it takes me right back to being in an ambush in Fallujah. That was what the 7-ton was doing. When we got hit, I used to respond much differently than now, to where I'm kind of, I think through it.
See it for what it is and deal with it. And
it's not the sense of forgetting and just completely letting go, but it's just choosing to remember it differently, so you can respond accordingly to it. The same way a kid doesn't touch the hot stove anymore. He doesn't, avoid the stove altogether and not go into the kitchen. And unfortunately, that kind of is what happens with a lot of families, a lot of guys, because that's their new norm now. They accept it and they kind of just stay there,
instead of choosing to get better.
And either choose or just refuse, for a whole host of reasons.
And some guys think the only way to deal with it is by self-medication.
So they numb themselves out to the point that they just can't respond poorly. Right. Instead of trying to get better.
I'd rather not respond, do anything, just be almost completely comatose instead of yelling at whoever it is in front of me.
So post-traumatic stress. It's real. We would acknowledge that. It has physiological impacts, neurological impacts. It impacts the way our body functions, often depending on the degree of trauma. It can cause problems in our lives. We've got a system intended to protect us, and it works that way. It can also be trained to protect us, but at the wrong place and the wrong time, it can be something that's detrimental to ourselves and those around us. We should not accept that we're broken, because accepting that we're broken means we can't move forward, we can't live a productive life, we can't have productive relationships. So we're either going to be angry and broken and probably alone, or we're going to medicate ourselves to the point where people can at least tolerate us. We would say the better decision is to decide to get up, acknowledge what has happened, observe, orient, make some decisions, and then act, be intentional, and move forward. So let's transition to that. 2 things. One, I would like to get some thoughts, some tips, if we use tips because we don't have all day, but some thoughts on how someone can move forward in spite of that trauma. But before we do that, because this is the starting point, why is faith, that aspect of faith is very broad, but why is faith so important before the other stuff happens? Why do we have to encounter encounter trauma with faith? Why does it have to be dealt with that way?
I think we can look at sort of like an opposite view. For example, if we're talking about faith and we're talking about a higher power, I know in our case we're talking about God. And as far as trauma is concerned, if there is no God, then what's the purpose of that trauma? Like, what is going on here? It's useless. But I think if there is a God, there is a purpose for that trauma. And going down that road and trying to find that out eventually leads, I believe, to hope, which what I've seen countless of times.
So keep going down that path, but that requires, though, that faith is not used broadly,
right? As
in belief in whatever you want to. That's right. There has to be specific belief in God. I was going to say a specific God, but in God. And so then that leads to hope. So continue that thought.
Yeah. So because there is a belief in God, then we believe that there is a plan that He has, and if He has a plan, then He had a plan for this trauma in my life. And I know certainly in my case, this almost catastrophic event happened, which I believe was what led me to Mighty Oaks, to hear the gospel anew and to really realign my life, to get to know this God who made me. And after that point, so many other things made a lot more sense to me forward and in my past. And that does that mean that life got easier? No, I'm equipped Now, going forward, I'm equipped. And I reap the benefits, my wife reaps the benefits, my kids reap the benefits, my friends reap the benefits. Yeah. So yeah, eventually there is hope. And sometimes it's a difficult thing to realize that, man, I don't have it all together. I don't control everything. Let me try to understand what's really going on here.
Because hopelessness, which is where a lot of people find themselves, hopelessness is saying, I've tried as hard as I can to control it, to hold it together, to do this or that, and I don't have the ability to do it. I'm trying to control something I can't control. Hope says, I can't control it, but there's something outside of me, in this case we're talking about God, who can and is and does, and I may not understand it all, but there's hope because I have confidence in him. And that allows me then to rise above the situation that I currently find myself in. And I think that's what motivates people who they're, I'll use the word incentive again. They're being incentivized to stay broken. They are wallowing in self-pity and, whatever. They're angry and they're justifying their anger. They're treating people poorly. They're medicating themselves numb. Why do people continue to do that? Because they're hopeless. But when you realize there is hope, there is God, he has a plan, and he can carry me forward. That's when we start to do the work of moving forward.
Yeah. I'd add within that hopelessness, attached or directly under it is pride, in where people, even though they might recognize that there's issues, or they come and say that they're broken, their pride prevents them from really actually moving forward, because they latch onto it and say, it's my problem, I need to figure out how to do it, I need to fix it on my own. They refuse to reach out for help, and they do everything on their own, which we know you can't. Like this is not something, life is not meant to be done on your own. In the bigger picture, as we bring faith into it, for me, understanding that from the creation aspect, if I'm created, then I'm created for a purpose,
right.
And I have to go to see what the Creator's purpose is for me. Just the same way, if you look at any piece of machinery, in order to really understand how to use it, there's an owner's manual and all that. So for me and many others, I go to the source, which is God's word, which is Bible, and see, okay, what does that have to say, and look through that. It may not have a specific word on post-traumatic stress disorder or anything like that, but it definitely does talk about anxiety, depression, discouragement, hopelessness, all of those things, and being fallen people.
Right.
And because I can look at that and see what the Bible says, but then also to be able to see how to grow through that and have that heart change to allow my behaviors to shift afterwards, I remove me from it completely, and I put all the reliance on the Creator to help me through that process, while bringing the right people around me to be able to speak into my life and tell me, like, hey, no, you're screwing up, and here's why, or you may want to redirect your course and go a different way, and make sure I'm going down the right path and doing the right thing, not just for me, but for my family, for other people, but to bring that hope back into it, so you have something to look forward to each day, and you don't fall back to what's the purpose of today, like what's the point.
We've said this a few times, but none of what we're talking about removes the trauma or causes you to forget. People say, you just need to get over it. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is it no longer having a hold on you or control of you, because you're able to move forward in the direction that God has created you to move.
Yeah, and I think there's something worth saying. There's something worth about. We have to mention also that there is this part of us that wants to hold on to bitterness and resentment because of what's happened in our life. And understanding now that kind of stuff is toxic, not only to us, but to our relationships. is a big deal.
Yeah.
And to think that it's not, we're lying to ourselves, we're going to stay there. And so sometimes guys, I think, use that as an excuse that, oh, you don't understand what I've been through. I'm going to stay bitter. I'm going to stay resentful. And there's just this toxicity that happens. And I think that's why we often in our programs talk about forgiveness and what does that mean?
Yep.
And how does that affect us? And how does that affect others going forward? And I think that's a big piece.
It's huge. And it's so strange to even talk about that someone would be that broken, that hurt, that bitter, that angry, and want to stay there. I was talking a while ago about this, and I said it's a weird thing, but we've seen it play out. You watch that show Hoarders on television, and these people are living in absolute filth. Some of them have not gotten up from their chairs in years. Absolute filth. Family members, friends will come in, tell them they need to get out. Others will come in. They'll bring a crew in. They'll want to clean the whole house. They'll fight it. They'll fight it. They'll fight it. They'll fight it. They'll do it anyhow. And you watch these episodes. These folks come into these clean houses where the floors have been redone and the walls have been repainted. They're no longer in filth, and they break down because they feel like they lost all their stuff. Mm-hmm. They want to go back to the filth they were living in. It doesn't make sense, but they've identified with that, and that's what you're talking about. There's so many people who identify with the anger and the bitterness and all the frustration, and they just want to stay there. And it doesn't make sense. They can't move forward if they stay there.
Yeah, I always look at it, especially for myself, it was a source of fuel and motivation. When I was angry or bitter, it gave me like this energy and fuel to go and do all these other things. But at that same time, I was destroying my body, destroying everybody behind me, and it got so bad to the point, as the Bible says, it's heart of stone. Like that thing was encased and levels of concrete, and it got me to a point where I absolutely didn't care that I didn't even care anymore, because I refused to even accept anything way before that. I missed and ignored all the signs of people coming to me and saying, hey, this is going on, or are you okay, and all that. And I wanted to stay in that realm. For whatever reason, it helped me stay alive on the battlefield. It helped me train my guys to be tougher, or that was the leader that was kind of respected. Was that kind of hard charging, like no nonsense, Warhammer guy. But at the end of it, like it destroyed everything around me while destroying me, and almost put me to a point where I wouldn't be sitting here today. But again, looking back at it, I truly and without a doubt believe God used all those pieces, and where I would argue all the woulda, shoulda, couldas and the regrets of my life, looking at God was using me to grow and learn, to finally be put in a position where I'm at today, and only by His grace can I be sitting here with my family, with the friendships and everything that I have today.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so someone's watching or listening, they get it. I'm not broken, but I'm hurt. I do want to move forward. I just don't have any idea how. I'm sitting in that house and it's filthy. I know that. The anger, the bitterness, the stuff. I just don't want that anymore. How do I start moving forward? What are, Luis, 3 or 4 things that, these are the targets. You need to start doing these things.
Yeah, I would first start by acknowledging this is where you are, and really understanding there has to be a way. You have to want to move forward. Often we get guys that come to us because of what's been done to them. They've done other things to other people, and so this guilt and shame starts to set in. And to try to give them a frame of reference in this biblical perspective that we have, the reason why there is shame, I think that it's by design. We have shame because there is guilt. It's by design, and that should push us to want to not stay there. And I think a way forward is to reach out for help. I mean, that just start small, right? Start with the biggest problem, starting small, identifying that I need help. And that could be a close friend just saying, hey, what do you know? Who do you know that can help me out of this situation? And I think that's how it begins. It's just asking for help, number one.
What's after that?
After that, I believe it try to find people or an organization or someone that has been where you are and just found a way forward, because there are plenty of people that can understand your situation, but also have a way forward.
It's like you're laying on the battlefield with that, you're bleeding out. The first thing you need is someone to come and put their pressure on to stop the bleeding, right? That's asking for help. Yeah. But the next thing you need to do is get to a hospital where they're trained and they have the equipment and the know-how to get you back on your feet. And that's the second part of that, is get around people that have the expertise they need to really help you move forward.
Yeah, and I think this shame piece, you don't want people to find out what's going on with you.
They're going to find out.
That's right. It's a big lie. I mean, people know. It's a big lie, right? Yes. And so don't pay attention to that lie. Go reach out for help. Find somebody that's been where you are. They know a way forward, but definitely get with somebody. Don't try to figure it out on your own.
That's good.
It's
Branden, what are a couple things there?
Yeah, it's interesting. Before I jump into that, with a lot of those guys that come through that, the first day they're hesitant to open up and say anything during the the icebreaker and all that. And they don't want anybody to find out what's going on with them and all those deep down secrets. But then by the end, they're on fire and they're like, I need to go.
Can't stop them.
And they want to. Yeah. I mean, if I would let them, they would join the team that day and be a part of it. So that change throughout it is like you said, that lie that people really need to understand of like as you go through it, how much help you can be to yourself. It can be to yourself, but then to others. But for me, it goes back to kind of the self-aid, buddy aid, triage aspect. We're understanding and acknowledging immediately you don't have all the answers,
right? And
that will help you go into the next phase, which is you can't do this thing on your own. And even if you don't know where to start, in this day and age, there's so much out there, and you also have to go into it understanding that there's going to be trials and tribulations, and you're going to try something that might not work that first time, and there's other options that are out there, and you just have to take that step. But that's the key part right there, is that first part of willingness to go and not want to be in that position anymore, and then to carry over to the family, the spouses, the friends that come or are struggling and with those questions of what can I do?
Yeah, I can hear someone screaming right now saying, well, what do I do? How do I help them?
And understanding there's not anything that you can do for them. It's the same. You can lead the horse to the water, but you can't make them drink, kind of thing. But just be honest, encourage them, and explain how you truly feel about it, all the things you recognize, and then it's their opportunity and their responsibility on how they respond and react to it. Unfortunately, what I think happens is prior to that, a lot of people are afraid of the response. The same way a lot of Christians are hesitant or afraid to share the gospel, in the sense they don't want to ruin a relationship potentially.
Yeah, just don't rock the boat.
Yeah, they don't want to rock the boat. Yeah. They don't want to say the wrong thing or get into the argument and stuff. I definitely look at it the same way with people confronting a family member or a friend or something. They don't want to destroy what's happened or what they have and make things much difficult later on. But you have to take that step back, and the same way I look at, if I truly love this person and want nothing but the best for them, I'm going to share the gospel with them. I need to share the gospel with them the same way I would want somebody to do that with me, the same way that if I see somebody going down the same path that I was going down, I'm going to let them know their response is their responsibility. But even though they might respond negatively or just brush you off or whatever, that doesn't mean that you stop.
Right.
You have to continue on and do everything within your power and your responsibility to do it. And I think that's the big gap that really goes out there. Or people are afraid or they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
they're trying to like sort through all that, and
it's with love and it's compassion, and there's a difference between trying to help and nagging. Because I think a lot of I'll talk to folks and they're like, I tell them every single day he's got to get. Well, that's not what we're talking.
Yeah, you don't want to shut the person down and completely.
It's constructive and it's helpful.
Wall them off, but
and I also mentioned too, for the people who know someone who's isolated, for the people that know someone who's depressed. A word of advice to them is that person who's depressed and who's isolated, they're actually counting on you not to reach out. Mm-hmm. They're counting on you to not contact them. That's right. And that's something that you don't need to pay attention to. You need to reach out. You need to constantly, even if it's every other day, call on them and check on them. They want to know that no one else is.
They've created this thing in their minds that no one cares about.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yep. And you're going to confirm it by not talking. We were just talking about that this morning with people. Yeah, excellent. Man, so many good things. A lot of other things we could talk about. But for those that are watching or listening, I want to give you a couple resources, because this is, the reason we do this show. Hopefully it's entertaining. We have a lot of good stories and great guests. But more than anything, we want to provide it to you as a resource, just for information. So a couple of things that you can do. The best thing you can do if you are struggling with post-traumatic stress or trauma or just trying to figure stuff out, whether you've been in the military or not, you're in the first responder community or not, go check out our website, mightyoaksprograms.org. On our website, you'll find an application for one of our week-long programs. We have men's programs and women's programs, a lot of opportunities. Fill out an application. Our applications team will get back to you. We'll sort through whatever logistics issues need to be dealt with, and we'll get you to a place where you can get the kind of help that you need. No cost to you. The program's free, travel is free, we take care of it. And I say we take care of it because we've got incredible donors who make this possible. And so you can also give on our website if you'd like to do that to support what we're doing. But there's an application there. There's also resources that you can look at, articles. We have a blog there as well. Tons of stuff there that you can take a look at. Also, and I mentioned this earlier, if you haven't yet, you can go to our YouTube channel, go to YouTube, look for Mighty Oaks Foundation. You'll find our channel. On that channel, there are literally hundreds of videos, interviews, just ideas and thoughts and tips and tons of resource material that you can use to send out to some of these people. Maybe you send a link, send out something that was interesting to you to someone that may be struggling or just in need, trying to figure things out. Maybe that's you. Take some time to work through that. We would love for you to do that. That would be fantastic. And then we've written a few books. We've written a bunch of books. You can find those on our website, mightyoaksprograms.org. But the one I would point you to today is a simple little book. It's called The Truth About PTSD. The Truth About PTSD. And the title, the D is small, it's lowercase because, again, we don't believe it's a disorder. But just some thoughts on how you can move forward. You can find that on our website, or you can find it on Amazon. And we're even putting the Kindle version on Amazon for free for you to download. So go to Amazon.com, The Truth About PTSD. You can find the Kindle version and download that for free. More than anything, we want you to have the help that you need. And so we do everything we can to take away every obstacle. And sometimes money's the obstacle. So that's there for you. Go to our website, go to our YouTube channel, and go check out those books. We would love to help you any way that we can. Thank you again for watching. Thank you for listening. Look forward to talking to you next time.